Critical service learning can bridge or narrow the theory-practice gap by providing educators with much-needed practical experience that they're going to consult when considering the effectiveness of their teaching approaches or strategies, the methods of assessment that they employ, the discipline that they require, that they enforce within their own classrooms. It's going to be determining what works and what doesn't. It's going to be giving them opportunities to see perhaps the approach that they've been employing needs work. Perhaps they could be using a different approach. Perhaps they could be using a blend of different approaches. For example, an educator could realize that certain assessments might be more suited for collaborative learning instead of individual work. Critical service learning gives educators opportunities to be reflective, critically reflective on their own first-hand experience to see what works and what doesn't within their own classroom. But regardless of how well you teach, the educator will always encounter barriers to effective teaching. Some of these will be more severe than others. In the case of novices, lack of experience and confidence issues. These two, in my own experience, I felt, especially in the case of classroom discipline, student behavior. Within the first 2 weeks of my most recent TPRAC, I was put in charge of a grade 9 classroom, and I struggled to keep them under control. However, after those 2 weeks, once I had gathered enough confidence and a little more experience, I figured out how to speak to them. I figured out how to handle assessment within my classroom. I figured out how to make use of certain discipline measures, such as the demerit system, for example. I learned how to work with them. And that was primarily because my confidence had improved. Another classic barrier is resource limitation. If I'm to compare my first TPRAC versus my second TPRAC, the availability of technology in the first one gave me access to many online tools that I could make use of at any time, whereas the second TPRAC, I was limited. Some of the assessments that I wanted to make use of, I couldn't, because they didn't have unlimited access. For example, the Wi-Fi it's not as simple to connect to the Wi-Fi at the second school that I taught at. Barriers for in-service teachers. A common one that I feel is especially applicable to older teachers who are not as savvy with multiple or the newer methodologies within teaching. They tend to stay with a teacher-centered approach instead of a student-centered approach, which is fine. However, as time goes on, more and more educators are finding that student engagement and the efficiency, the effectiveness of teaching within a classroom, those rates improve as time goes on, as kids become more and more technology savvy, technology dependent. They are now adopting more student-centered approaches, which lend themselves to more effective teaching in today's day and age, in contemporary times. So a classic barrier for the older teachers that tend to stick with a more teacher-centered approach, they run into this barrier, as well as diverse student needs. Another barrier that is becoming more and more applicable. It's imperative that the new teacher, when they arrive at their new school at which they are employed, they familiarize themselves with the diverse student needs, the diverse languages that are being used, the diverse cultural environment that may be at the school. Collaboration between learners and service teachers is a very, very valuable tool that can be used. It encourages open communication between the students and the teacher. This is going to be giving the teacher another opportunity to improve upon their lessons by learning through these senior students the barriers that they may not be aware of. These senior students could make these teachers more aware of the barriers that these students might be facing. It's also going to be, these senior students are also going to be providing valuable insights to the teacher regarding student interests. What approaches the students might be more inclined to work well under. It's a very, very, very valuable tool to be using, is having that open communication between your senior students and yourself. If you're going to be critically reflecting with the purpose of improving your own teaching experience, your own teaching efficiency, the enjoyment, the engagement of your learners within your own classroom, you need to be making use of a multitude of different tools, as well as constantly reflecting. Every so often, reflect on your own experience, on your own lessons. Are they really as effective as they could be? Are your students really as engaged? And are they really truly enjoying your lessons? This is why it is so imperative to be critically reflecting on your own teaching approaches as time goes on. Not just in the beginning of your practice, but as time goes on.